good to see everybody here, and the sun's come out, so it's a better day for us. I'd like to welcome Sam and Lisa at your first meeting. I know you've been with us before, Sam, and you're back with us, but it's good to see you. Welcome everybody else. You'll see who we all are from our name badges, so I won't go around the table introducing. So we've got apologies for absence from Amir and from Ben Aspinall, Tamsin Hart-Jones and Helen Lennon. Okay, thank you. I draw your attention to declaration of interest. And then the item 3 is the exempt information. We do have two exempt items, 9 and 10. We'll deal with that when we get to them. So we'll move on. And can we agree the minutes of the 20th of April?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 5, governance arrangements.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is to advise the Place, Regeneration and Housing Committee of the governance arrangements that were approved by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority at the annual meeting. So we have terms of reference that have been attached to Appendix 1. The quorum for this committee is 3 voting members to include 2 Combined Authority members or local authority co-optees. And the Combined Authority appointed Councillor Denise Jeffrey as chair and Amir Hussain as deputy. It's also set out the meeting dates, the future meeting dates. We've got 6 meetings that are due to take place of this committee throughout the year. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any questions.
Are there any questions? Can we agree the recommendation set out in 10.1? Okay, thank you very much. And then item 6, the programme development creating greater places. Alison.
Thanks, Chair. So this agenda item's to provide you with, as a committee, with some space to explore the role of the Combined Authority in place and infrastructure. So I'll just talk you through the context that I've set out in the paper, but then I'll hand it back to the Chair to allow you to offer your thoughts around the themes that I've included in the paper and some of the key questions. So just by way of context, you'll be aware that we have a single investment fund and we have a West Yorkshire investment strategy. That strategy was updated at June Combined Authority meeting, and there are 6 areas of focus for intervention identified as investment priorities in that strategy. The third of those, priority 3, is creating great places and accelerated infrastructure. So that's the one that's most closely aligned to this committee. There is an interface with some of the others, but that's the one that's the focus of our discussion today. So what's important and what's triggered this opportunity really for a discussion today is that devolution and our funding landscape has changed, and so we do have increased flexibility at a West Yorkshire level around funding, and that means that we can move to a more proactive and a less reactive approach to pipeline and programme development. So I've included a couple of things by way of context in the paper. So first of all, I've included some of the points that you raised at your February meeting around the role of the committee. So I've put those in the paper because obviously we have 2 new members today, Lisa and Simon, with us, and then also just as a reminder for some of those committee members. So the things you were raising were around what's the committee's role in contributing to sustainable placemaking, how do we make sure we're serving the right people, the people that we need to, how do we make sure we're inclusive, and also you made a comment around reflecting that regeneration. The context is that we have some areas that work economically, and then we have other areas where they don't attract inward investment and they require uplifting in some way, but that needs to be done in a way that supports what's already on the ground. So that's just to remind you of some of the conversation we had back in February, because I think some of those things we might be able to pick up again in today's discussion. And then the second thing I've included by way of context is a link to the place narrative document. So that was a document that was put in place by the Place Panel, the predecessor to this committee, and includes a lot of the evidence that informs our choices around how we invest in infrastructure. So I've set out 3 questions at 2.6, which I think may help frame our discussion today. So first of all, what are the key areas and themes that programme development should target? And that's in the context of IP3, place and infrastructure. From your experiences, where are the gaps in the placemaking landscape which the combined authority could provide added value? And then thirdly, what are the principles we should use to support prioritisation of investments? So for example, the quality or priority communities. We've had some of those conversations before as well. So just to support the discussion, I've included a number of themes in the table, which is set out at 2.8. So those are all things that are linked to the work of this committee, but are also hooked into the West Yorkshire investment strategy under IP3. There may be other things. If you've had a look at the investment strategy, IP3 is quite broad ranging. But the themes I've included are housing, digital infrastructure, flood risk, design quality, safer and stronger communities, employment opportunities, and green infrastructure. So I won't go through the detail of what's included. We've put some thoughts down around what our ambition as a strategic authority is in those themes, and some potential outcomes that we've either could look to target or are already targeting. So as you'll be aware, under some of those themes, we already do have some advanced pipelines and programmes of work, and then there are some others in there where we haven't had a huge amount of prior engagement as a strategic authority. But as I say, there may be other themes that you wish to discuss today. So I will hand back to you, Denise, if that's okay, as chair, and if we could work through some of those questions at 2.6 so we can capture your thoughts as a committee on what you think the priorities are around those themes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alison. Just for new members and to refresh us really, is that I think at the last meeting, particularly Amir, my deputy, were very keen that we had discussions rather than just be presented with papers, and that we had a real input into what we were doing. I know he's very frustrated that he's away today and he's going to his first chance to get involved in this, and he hasn't. But I think he's quite pleased that that we are having a discussion paper. I think it's important for the committee that we do feel that we have a committee that we are making a difference coming to the committee, and not just rubber stamping everything that comes forward, that we do have a proper discussion. So we're saying that, who would like to kick off? Yes, Cassie.
Hello, good morning. Yes, Kirklees are in agreement, everything that's set out in 2.8, but in addition to this, what we would like to see is the Green Street programme that the Mayor enthusiastically launched in their White Rose Forest Action Plan. So that is one of the areas that we would like to be included in that.
Hi, morning. I'm just looking at the. I mean, we've got green infrastructure as a different one. I'm looking at the housing, and it's talking about retrofitting and higher energy efficient standards in new homes. I really think we need a bigger emphasis on climate change, making homes resilient, but also any new homes need to have as much possible that they don't have to rely on traditional forms of heating at all, rather than just energy efficiency. That I mean, from 2025 they won't be able to have any gas boilers, but we've still got 2.5 years till that deadline. So I'd really like to see, you know, things like solar panels as just what you do rather than an extra that people have to pay extra for as well. And I think this committee can really, in terms of placemaking and looking at things holistically as well as retrofitting, I think there needs to be a bigger emphasis on the climate emergency in the housing context.
I think that is definitely in the scope of the activity that the Combined Authority is working on, so it's something we can include.
There. Shall I start again? Okay. Okay, see if I can do that then. So just to build on what you said, Lisa, I think we talked about this at a previous committee about connecting between different programmes. And I think, you know, the transport infrastructure, and particularly the active transport infrastructure, can really be a valuable addition to you know, to creating great places. As I think the culture and sport and creative industries, including the parks and open space, landscaping places, you know, can really make places attractive to people to live and to help address health inequalities. You know, where people have got access to do things, and I think there's also a knock-on impact on housing design there, because if we're going to encourage people to be active from their homes, then in terms of housing design, then they might want somewhere to store bikes or trikes or scooters, you know. And there's something about I think what you said, Helen, thanks, about making it what we do round here rather than something that, you know, would be a nice to have kind of thing.
And we'll make a real difference.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go, first time. A bit like being on mute on a Teams call. Yeah, I'd just emphasise the point at the moment that I think there is a challenge that, and it covers it further on in the paper, about commuting, you know, cutting down and commuting, because that has an impact on environment. So the working from home model is kind of at odds with escalating home bills that we're seeing. So we're encouraging people to work from home, and we want them to work from home because it helps free up the roads. But in that future housing plan, I think we've got to be bolder in terms of the objectives to meet that climate challenge. I think at the moment what we're seeing is building regs is probably not going far enough.
Have you anything else, Alison, you want to add, or
No,
what
that's
you've
fine.
heard?
I suppose it would be helpful to get a few reflections on the principles that we might use around prioritisation of investments on place and infrastructure, but I don't know whether anybody's got any reflections on that question in particular.
Darren?
Thank you. Under the first box shown on on page 20, the second paragraph is increasing the scale and pace of retrofit of existing housing stocks. just picking up on something you said about making a real difference, that's something that can make a real difference now, because of the energy crisis and everything else. And we have significant numbers, as I'm sure you all have, of the houses that are really badly insulated and are in dire need of this. So if there was one thing that we were to pick up on, I think that would make the biggest impact very, very quickly. And it needs innovation, and that might have to be led by us as opposed to expecting the market to do it in the first instance. So I think that needs real, serious consideration and very quickly.
Yeah, I completely concur with that, and bringing partners together and looking at a place as Leeds Council has led on in Holbeck, and we're seeing a real difference to people's lives in the recreations there. I mean, that work started back in 2016, but it's a real hub approach where you have a hub where all the different private sector and kind of public bodies like work together. It's been really successful, and you're absolutely right about making a difference now. When they did the monitoring, so they measured the ambient temperature inside a house in the recreations in February 2017 or whatever, and it was 12 degrees Celsius. A year later, when it had been retrofitted, the ambient temperature inside was 18 degrees Celsius. You do not have to heat your house very much more to get it up to 20, which I'm sorry, I think is balmy, as in BALIMY. My dad thinks is some kind of like frozen. He spent enough decades being cold, he tells me. So like when he was a child and a teenager. So, but that's a nice temperature for your house. And we hear from people, and the mayor came to visit last year, very cold day last November, when phase 2 was being finished, and we had a ministerial visit and met a fabulous woman who had 4 children, and she said her children could do their homework in their bedrooms after it being retrofitted. So that's making such a difference to their educational outcomes, their health outcomes, and their future prospects in terms of employment and well-being in the future. And that's just by doing this one thing. But also, I mentioned the green streets. We're also in that area bringing in the living streets, because only 1/3 of people own a car. Yet it's dominated by streets because they're back-to-backs. But then your point again, Leeds has got 20,000 back-to-backs. We've done about 300.
Thank you. Yeah, just to support what everyone else is saying about importance of retrofitting, but is there also something about working with the housing standards teams in the authorities as well? Because a lot of these properties that are kind of at the real worst end of insulation, actually very poor quality housing in general. They might have damp problems. It might not just be about double glazed windows, but poor frames and rot in the house. That's where the housing standards teams come in alongside that, because it might be the case that you can insulate a house and the rest of it's just as bad and needs that other intervention as well, and sometimes that'll be incumbent on the owner actually with fulfilling their legal responsibilities. So sometimes of those programmes probably worth just a consideration of how we work with the local housing teams as well, which are very overstretched anyway with all the work in particular high-rising and cladding and all that sort of thing, which is also really important. But there's a kind of whole housing approach there, but as Councillor Hayden says, for sort of wide impact across so many areas like public health and education and everything else, it's something that certainly needs more looking, and particularly in the private rented sector as well, where it's key. And I know the government were looking at decent home standards for PRS as well, so maybe if we can get a functioning government that they can push that through.
Go there.
Yeah. Thank you.
I love the point that you made about the family, who the children could do their homework, and that's what we're about, making a difference to people's lives. And that's what matters to us all. I think that's why we're all here, to try and make change. Anyone else want to comment? Stephen?
Just a brief one, and that is under the digital. I think there needs to be a focus on schools, because as the rollout for infrastructure is going to take a while, certainly for the last 15%. And I think there is a there's going to be a real divide that's going to come in between those schools that have the quality gigabit capable infrastructure and those schools that are limping by with what they've got. So I think even if we have to have a plan slowly to get to the homes, but I think the schools really need a focus so that we can get to them first or as quickly as possible.
Thank you. You've just mentioned the schools, so I'm happy about that. But the other element I'm thinking about is the budgetary requirement. If we look at the whole house and the environment, what projects will slip because there's got to be a budgetary element. Prices have increased phenomenally. So I just think we've got to be mindful of that as well. You know, we want to target the right people.
I don't know about anybody else, but it's become a real problem with the 5G masts going up in front of people's houses and beside our 17th century stately home of Temple Newsome that we did. I'm actually, and I think this is where there's a gap that could be filled by the combined authority. I'm going to attend our 5G board, which I'm not invited to, but you know, like it's kind of an officer one, but kind of gate crashing at the end of the month. Just because we're getting lots around the city of residents really unhappy about where these masts are being placed, and that we as a local authority and a planning authority have very few powers, if any. So I think just to get and think about those hard to reach places, the kind of to me it seems as though they're starting with the low hanging fruit. So in Leeds you will, you know, get places, but actually we want it out into the more rural parts of Leeds in my case, but and also but just thinking about where these masts are being placed, and do we have a holistic map of West Yorkshire about where they all are or where they're planned to be? Has anybody got any oversight of that, or are we just reliant on the private sector to put the masts where they want them to be?
We might as well just leave this on.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we've had similar issues in Bradford, I'm sure all of us have, and like Councillor Hayden says, the planning powers are quite limited because you've kind of got a presumption to approve. But then maybe there's something about the regional weight of a combined authority in terms of engaging with the companies and the infrastructure companies, because I've had meetings with them where it's kind of like trying to talk about myth busting because some were getting set on fire and all the 5G conspiracy, and it was like, well, we've got a leaflet, and it didn't go much further than that. And then in terms of consultation engagement, we've had it where they email councillors for feedback and then you don't get any feedback. The application goes in anyway, and then suddenly everyone's going, well, we didn't get spoken to, and just that consistent thing of, oh, well, we wrote out to you. And we actually could evidence that we'd wrote back and there was just never any acknowledgement. Then they'd used it retrospectively to say we'd fulfilled the statutory functions of engagement, but it's very tick box. So, you know, statutorily, there'll be a limit to what we can do, but maybe there's something about the weight of a combined authority, just in terms of community engagement, if nothing else, because although it's mostly, we'd hope, passed through the conspiracy phase as well, there was a genuine problem in communities where infrastructure was being damaged as well, and that came through a lack of engagement from the organisations, and it's hard for them at points because some of their staff will have been abused, but then it's about protecting their staff as well when they're on site doing that, and effective upfront engagement will help make sure you find the right spot as well. And we had one in our ward where they could have put it 50 feet away and it'd have been a million times better, but they'd ignored the upfront feedback they'd got and then it ended up going in. So it's very frustrating, but maybe there's just that soft power that the combined authority can utilise to engage and bring them to the table a bit, maybe.
They do the minimum and tick the boxes, and then this is what happened. Melanie, is there anything we could do as a combined authority on this?
I think Justin wants to come in actually.
Sorry, Justin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on the digital infrastructure point and the masts, unfortunately we don't have any kind of direct planning powers to kind of manage or kind of control those into where they go, other than when the application kind of lands. but we are looking at ways to map more coverage in the future as part of our evidence base for the item will come in a little while, and that will give us a bit more of a direction in terms of where the hotspots might be. And the other part I was thinking in relation to your question was basically we do have some engagement with Mobile UK, who are kind of the body that represent all the mobile operators. That relationship, I think we could re-energise that a little bit and try and bring that mass debate into there in terms of having a bit more foresight on where they're going to go and what the issues are from our side, and try and maybe do that a bit more collaboratively in the future, because they do seem to kind of just appear sometimes without any kind of community engagement up front. So I can take that away as an action.
Thank you so much.
Yes, that would be really useful. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, the recommendations are set out at 10.1, 10.2. Can we agree that? And I think we can say we have had a good, we'll tell them here that we've had a good debate. Okay, thank you. Item 7, housing pipeline review and fund update. This is going to be led by Polly.
Judith. So Polly isn't here today, she's on a training day. I'm Judith Furlonger, head of housing, so I'll present the paper. This paper's really just a bit of a review and a bit of an update. Housing Pipeline Revenue Fund was part of the devolved funding that was agreed as part of the setting up of the Mayoral Combined Authority. The fund in total was 3.2 million. It's revenue funding. So what we have been doing is working with each of the districts to increase capacity, contribute to technical reports, and basically begin to move the housing pipeline forward. So this is just a kind of a halfway update in terms of the structure of the funding so far, in terms of where that funding has gone and which authorities have been supported so far. And what we'll be doing over the next 6 months really is doing a bit of an impact assessment in terms of tracking through where that money is now bringing forward investable units, sites, sorry. In terms of the fund itself, we think this funding is supporting the delivery of a good number of new homes, and of that about 3,000 affordable homes. And what we will be doing is working with agencies such as Homes England, with the funding that we've got in terms of Brownfield Housing Fund, and any other investment programmes that Homes England have, to begin to move that pipeline forward and into an investment position so those sites begin to deliver quickly. So this is just kind of, as I say, halfway stage, setting out where we currently are, and that we will be coming back to you at the end of the programme to begin to report back the impact of what that programme's brought to the region and the development of that housing pipeline.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Anyone want to comment on this? Can we agree the recommendation? Thank you.
It's me. Thank you, Chair. This is a short introduction to a piece of work that we've been carrying out in conjunction with our police and crime team colleagues. It's been taken through the police and crime executive, so it's not governed by this panel, but I thought it would be worth making you all aware of the project, because I think it's potentially going to be very exciting findings that we've got from it. I'll just take you through the paper. We had the opportunity to bid into the Home Office Safer Streets funding in October 2021, and I had the idea to work on safer parks as a part of that bid, mainly because I'd heard of a campaign group called Make Space for Girls. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they're campaigning to have to make parks more attractive to women and girls, because they have found that they aren't, at the moment, they're not attracting particularly teenage girls. They find there's nothing there for them, and they don't know why. So I took that forward with my police colleagues and bid for the money, and we were very lucky to be successful, and got those amounts of funding that are in bullet points there on page 1. So we can't disclose the findings yet, really, but I can say that they're very interesting. The paper goes into the methodology, which I'll just touch on a little bit now, so you're aware how we've surveyed women and girls, and also parks managers and staff. So the University of Leeds have led the research project, and they've used something called Q methodology, which is where 50 statements that have been put together from a literature review are put in front of women and girls, and they arrange them according to which they agree with and which they don't. And they've also shown photographs of particular park layouts and park provision, play provision, and arrangements of furniture and things. And what we're finding, we're finding that there is a real importance in the way things are arranged, the built environment, the natural environment, to encourage girls to be in spaces. Basically, they're looking all around them all the time. It's very depressing, but the girls, in order to have the fun that they want and need, they also are checking constantly that there are no threats to them in the park and public spaces, which is quite alarming when you think about it. But I think we can work with it to make those spaces feel more attractive. The more girls and women use those spaces, the more we'll want to. That's the idea. But we've found that they do feel the environment is important. I suppose, unsurprisingly, the girls didn't all feel the same way, but also we've got sort of 3 groups of opinion. One that feel that things can be changed if the environment is changed in the park, but we've got very strong views coming forward as well that no matter how good the park environment is, you still need to fix the people and fix the men and men's groups of men behaviour and single men behaviour. So there is a lot of work we can do there with our police and crime colleagues to kind of address some of this. And one of the things we want to do is write some design guidance. We are applying for more funding to take this forward. We have a little bit, but we'd like more to try to integrate that, what we find in our results, into the Green Flag project, which is it's a bit like the Blue Flag project for beaches. So it assesses parks against certain criteria, and we have the opportunity to input into those criteria with what we've found. So this is just really to tell you this is what we've been doing. The analysis of the results is still going on, and we should know more in September, or a little bit later. The report should be October. So yeah, it's really just to say that this exciting piece of work is happening, and I don't know if you had any comments, or if you'd like to ask anything.
It'd be really interesting to see the outcomes of this, and it's a really exciting piece of work. I think I'm with the group that it doesn't matter what you do to a park, women and girls will always be, you constantly are anyway, aren't you, on the alert. And it's sad to say, but I teach my daughter different things to I teach my son, you know, in terms of being out and about by herself or with her friends and things like that. And that's just the sad reality. So I think that behavioural change is a real, and making men aware, which many are, but of just what their very presence does. And it's really unfair. And I have 4 brothers, and I once, when I was a young woman, I'm 7 years older than one of my brothers, and I saw a group of young men walking up the street, so I crossed the road. I crossed back when I saw it was John and his mates, who I've known since they were 3. You know, and he was really upset that I'd done that. But that's just, and now he's got girls. You know, he kind of fully understands. There's in 2.3, there was 49 statements, and one of them, having lighting in parks would make them feel safer for me to use after dark. We're advised by our park colleagues, because we get asked of this quite a lot, and being representing the wonderful ward of Temple Newton, we have fabulous green spaces. But what we're advised is, and I hope this comes out, is that it actually makes you more unsafe because people can lurk in the shadows, but you feel safe, so you don't take those precautions, and that's men and women. It's not, you know, just. So I'm hoping that will come out of there, because that's what we're told.
Yeah, we've been really aware of that actually. We've read quite a lot of the university colleagues and me, and I've read reports on this very effect, that you can have a pool of light and you basically just floodlit to any attacker. You can't see them because they're hiding in the shadows. So it's about, there's an ARUP report, and we've spoken to an ARUP colleague who's working on this. It's about the quality of dispersed light, and it's about those sight lines, being able to see all around you. So the kind of lighting needs to be a gentle gradient rather than a pool of very strong light. So we're very aware of that. Whether the girls that answered the question are aware, you know, in the same way, but I think that will certainly be, the results will be tempered with that knowledge, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for initiating the research. I think that's very useful. We'd like the money to do lots of things in our parks, but I think it might help influence what you do get green flags for, really. I wanted to ask specifically about skate parks, because lots of local authorities have put in skate parks in the bigger parks, and anecdotally I begin to see many more young women actually using skate parks than, say, even 5 years ago. Was there any specific question about skate parks?
Yes, we showed some pictures of skate parks in the photos that we showed the teenage girls. And Make Space for Girls have got a bit of a thing about skate parks, in that up to now, perhaps the Olympic champions made a big difference, I think. But up until now, they are finding that they are dominated by boys. So we did ask girls, we showed them pictures of skate parks and said, would you use this space? And Make Space for Girls have actually done some work on how to design a better skate park. And often it's about a group of people, young men usually, dominating a space, and they're not being options for different people to play in different spaces. So with a multi-use games area, you know, all of those fenced areas, it's about dividing that up so that more than one group of children can play in there at the same time. And I think that's what they've done with the skate park too, because they're very expensive, skate parks, and they are dominated not just by boys, but probably by one kind of type of boy, you know, the sporty boys. So we're definitely, that's part of the research, whether there was a strong focus of the research that we weren't trying to kind of fix girls. So the project is not to try and make girls interested in skate parks. That is a project for somewhere else, but it's about fixing the places so that they attract girls to use them. So we will definitely, that has been included, and we'll write the results, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Helena. I mean, this is great work, and I just wanted to highlight, and I think you know, you've been working, talking to some colleagues at Yorkshire Sport Foundation. There's some other, there's been some other research going on at a similar kind of time with Yorkshire Sport Foundation and Women in Sport, and I think that's a slightly broader remit, part of which is looking at why girls and young women aren't active in the first place, and I think combining these two pieces of research will be really useful, because it'll broaden out what we know, and that's being launched, published next week on the 14th, and there's a webinar about that on the 21st of July, which I know you can't go to, but we could circulate it maybe around this group of people that are interested. And I think it's important to join them together, because if we just look at designing spaces that girls and women can use, then we'll get the girls and women that would use stuff. And the danger is that we widen the inequality gap. So we also have to think about, in general, why the girls and women are not active. And also, you know, there'll be different reasons for that, depending on, depending on which cultures and communities, you know, those girls and young women are from. So I think, you know, we need to build all this together, don't we? So we've got the best insight that we can get. And I also think it links back to the previous agenda item, actually, in terms of being useful to support our local authorities, you know, to work and design in the best way that we can. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I've been working quite closely with Stephen Hayward on this project, and it was good because we had to focus on safety because of the funding, but Stephen's project is much wider in terms of that health, really, and sport. So yeah, it's going to be really useful too. We've got a seminar in October which we'll invite Stephen to. There's also a project going on in the northeast that we'll bring in as well. So we want to, very much kind of bring in all the analysis that's been done. There's been a wave of it actually after Make Space for Girls have made it kind of more public. It's been very successful, and the book Invisible Women as well, which led to the Make Space for Girls campaign, has really increased in interest in the area. So yeah, definitely we'll get you we'll work together.
Yeah, I think it's a great piece of work, and I think it's obviously of the moment, and people need to feel safe. But what I think is so sad is that councils, we're all short of funding, but over the last 2 years we've all put more money into our parks to attract people and families, etc. And we have done. In my particular ward, we spent a fortune refurbishing, from our community money, refurbishing a bandstand, putting concerts on in an evening, and then that all got vandalised. It's people's behaviour. It's been vandalised twice, and then I asked the police for more presence. A young policewoman went into the park the other night and was attacked by a load of teenagers. You just get so disheartened. You know, we're all trying to do so much for somewhere for people to go. And I actually went up to this park myself the other week and said to these kids, you know, look, will you stop you stop vandalising what we've got, what would you like? And they said they wanted a skate park. And we are looking at doing that. But it might not be the same kids that have been, you know, so it is so frustrating what we're trying to do. But, you know, the programme that you're doing, I think we need to do, all of us, to do as much as we can. But I don't know how we deal with people's behaviour when it's so disheartening. And local authorities are doing everything they can to make parks safe. And then it's so disillusioning when we get something like this.
My hope is that by bringing more people to parks, because parks are more attractive and feel more safe, then that has a snowball effect of making the park safer, because there are more eyes around.
Yeah, well, thanks for your report. Can we agree the recommendation? Okay, thank you. And then item 9 is the digital infrastructure. Did you say, Melanie, that we'd do some of it and then the other is to go into the private part?
Yes, Chair. I mean, it doesn't affect the recommendation, so we can have a full discussion around the report and then consider the recommendations. But when we've closed the meeting to the public, there is an exempt item that I will update members on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item covers 3 elements, really. So it provides an update on the Combined Authority's digital infrastructure work, and then I'll give you an update on the Department for Media, Culture and Sports national work on Project Gigabit, which is one of their national rollout programmes, and then the implications for West Yorkshire in terms of how it impacts us. And then I'll be seeking some discussion and endorsement, hopefully, for proposals to utilise broadband gain share, which I'll go on to what that is in a second. So in terms of the policy context, just very briefly, the regions digital ambitions are outlined in the digital framework, and that includes 5 priority actions. So they cut across the kind of wider digital landscape. So it looks at things such as digital technologies for businesses, getting out to all businesses, whether they're in the digital sector or not. Delivering a strong digital sector to enable everything else. So that's looking at businesses across the board where they've got a potential role in kind of digital connectivity. Something called Tech for Good, and that is about using technology to kind of, well, crudely put, to deliver systems level change. So looking at how digital can affect everything from transport to kind of utilities, and then thinking about how that links with the smart city agenda and how we use resources. Digital skills, which is obviously very important in terms of one thing's getting infrastructure in the ground, but there's also the skills and the ability to use that when it's available. And then last but not least, delivering a world-class digital infrastructure. And again, very kind of succinctly, that initially that is about delivering 100% coverage of gigabit capable broadband connectivity, and that's a speed of 1,000 megabits per second. So that's kind of the gold standard that we're looking for homes and businesses. And then also extending 4 and 5G mobile connectivity. And that increasingly means using basically the public sector tools that we have available to us to accelerate and unlock delivery from the commercial sector. And that's increasingly in the rural areas or other kind of hard to reach communities where the numbers essentially don't stack up in terms of being able to provide that connectivity. So that's the context. In terms of Project Gigabit, so that's the national programme that the government are running. So it's a slight change to what we're used to. Some committee members might be aware that we've got what we call the West Yorkshire and York Superfast programme at the moment, which is delivering this type of infrastructure, but it's a contract that the Combined Authority manages on behalf of the partnership, and we've kind of procured a partner, Quickline, and they're kind of in delivery. This is a movement from that in that the what we call Building Digital UK, who are an executive agency of DCMS. So that's akin to the relationship between Homes England and DCMS, and DLOT, sorry. And they will be delivering and managing contracts on the government's behalf. And in total, that's a £5 billion investment across England to achieve their ultimate aim, which is delivering 85% connectivity for gigabit-capable broadband by 2025, and then accelerating that rollout further to 100% as soon as possible. That's the kind of the stance at the moment from the national government. Just as context, gigabit coverage in West Yorkshire at the minute is around 75%. That's good. I think it's slightly above the national average, but that is focused, as it is in most areas, into the higher density urban areas. It's the rural areas that are really struggling, and they're progressively as speeds have increased. So we've gone from kind of dial-up to super fast to ultra fast, and now gigabit, which is 1,000 megabits. It's always the urban areas that get that first because it's just the easiest kind of geography to roll it out on. So this is about pushing it out further. So within Project Gigabit, which is that £5 billion of investment that I mentioned, the area for West Yorkshire, which is the main element of that programme, is referred to as Lot 8 by DCMS, and that's a large procurement area that will cover the bulk of West Yorkshire, parts of York, and parts of the urban fringe as well, where we border some of our neighbouring regions as well. That'll be, like I said before, that'll be procured centrally and managed by BDUK, but local partners remain kind of key stakeholders in that process, which is something that we've pushed a need for. And we've got specific roles that are laid out in the project partnership agreement, which I'll come on to in a second. In terms of scale for the West Yorkshire deployment, the indicative contract value has been between 128 and 218 million pounds, and that will connect approximately 45,000 premises. So it's a large programme, potentially up to kind of £250 million worth of investment, and obviously that will leverage in commercial investment hopefully as well. So it's a large rollout programme. And in terms of timescales, we're in the kind of evidence gathering stage now, so we're working with DCMS on that. But procurement is expected to start toward the end of this year, or potentially early 2023, with the contract to start with the appointed provider between October and December 2023. So there's a few stages to go through, but like I say, it is a significant piece of work. And again, just to put that in context, the scale of investment and rollout is bigger than all 3 phases of the Superfast programme to date that they've been working on for a number of years. So it's significant. I think that the takeaway from that is, I think although it's not something we manage, I think we do need to look at how we can make best value and accelerate and maximise the impact of that investment locally. So in terms of the partnership agreement that I mentioned, BUK have developed that on DCMS's behalf. It provides the framework for how the partners will work together, and it outlines some of the tasks that local bodies, so the local authority partners and the combined authority, could do to improve the programme. So that's generally around the communications, working with elected members and community groups, stakeholder management, what we call demand stimulation. So that's looking at how the take-up and usage of the technology when it's rolled out is utilised. So that's thinking about skills, looking at the economics of connectivity, and also just kind of just core advertising of the services. And then there's a lot of technical work to do in terms of reviewing the data provided from the commercial provider, commenting on those, and making sure our local priorities are played into any rollout programme. So I think that's been considered by the directors of the combined authorities. I think at the moment the proposal is that could be signed, but we're just working through some final clarifications on some of the points in that document. So I think that'll be a good document to have in place. So that's everything in terms of Project Gigabit. In terms of what we can do as a combined authority and with our partners. So there's something called Broadband Gain Share. So this is an investment fund held by Openreach as part of the Superfast Broadband Programme that operates across West Yorkshire and York. And that's in kind of an Openreach account, and it's gaining interest at the moment. And the fund is basically kind of West Yorkshire and York partner money, which is held by the combined authority on their behalf. And it's basically part of the process to manage the state aid requirements of the contract to make sure that the public subsidy that was put in initially is used effectively and excess profits aren't made. So we've had that in place for each contract. The contract 1 gain share, which has been kind of growing for a number of years, is reaching its final kind of review period in September this year. And at that point, we're expecting just below 2.4 million to be available to local partners. So we need to make a decision about what we do with that, basically. So we've had a discussion with the Superfast Programme Board, which includes local representatives from the partner authorities and BUK. And I think, kind of in summary, I've kind of noted down in the report that I think as a partnership, I think we thought there was still a lot of work to be done. Just looking at some of the coverage numbers I mentioned earlier. And there is a kind of a clear push from each of our local authority partners to continue with that work. We've done some good work to date. And they also noted that the broadband gain share is a flexible resource. So we've talked kind of quite a bit about kind of all those pots of funding that we have available, the strings that are attached. This local gain share is quite flexible, so it does give us a bit more latitude to think about kind of new and innovative ways of kind of delivering digital infrastructure, which might not be applicable to other funding sources. And then there was a feeling that I think, although it sounds like quite a bit of money, if you do start breaking it apart, it could potentially reduce the impact of the fund. So I think the appetite for collaboration is still there with the partnership. And then it was also a recognition that under investment priority 3, the combined authorities gain share, delivering great places and accelerated infrastructure, which Alison discussed earlier. Although it's an initial allocation, the 12 million allocated to that fund is potentially quite limited, looking at the breadth of activities that are in place for that priority. So again, is there a role for broadband gain share to do more to kind of supplement that? So working through with the programme board and other kind of stakeholders, we've basically outlined 2 proposals for the use of gain share. So one is looking at what we call a flexible gigabit grant programme. So the idea there would be that it would dovetail with Project Gigabit, which is run nationally, and look at potentially some of the more urban, hard to reach areas. So I wouldn't kind of overly dwell on the word urban there. Some of them are on the rural fringe, or the urban-rural fringe. But the idea there is that we don't overlap and duplicate and complicate what's happening with Project Gigabit, and that kind of up to £220 million worth of investment. The programme, we think at the moment, would look at kind of a voucher model where community groups of businesses and properties could club together with this voucher and then use that to subsidise connectivity where there is a kind of localised issue. and also looking at kind of direct delivery of infrastructure where there is an abnormal cost, for example, a bridge that needs to be crossed, or kind of an old Victorian duct that collapsed that maybe commercially couldn't be addressed, which was then blocking off access to a particular estate or something. So it would be a mix of solutions within that, but we're trying to keep it kind of flexible. So the proposal that we're looking for endorsement on is basically to start some more project development work on that, and then we'll bring that to the committee for further discussion and looking at kind of the impact it could have and the potential costs for that piece of work. The second part is a bit more discrete, so that's looking at a potential revenue resource to maximise local delivery of Project Gigabit, which I mentioned earlier, and that's generally centred around looking at delivering the local responsibilities that are outlined in the partnership agreement. So it's the demand stimulation, the communications, the stakeholder engagement, and making sure that we maximise that investment. And that'll be a bespoke role that we're proposing initially for a 2-year period, with the finances that are outlined in the report. So it's just below £130,000 of spend at the upper end of the grade thresholds for that role, assuming that we can appoint in a timely fashion. So they're the two proposals that we're seeking endorsement for. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Jane.
Thank you. I think some of that definition of urban versus rural fringe will probably have to change post-pandemic in many ways in terms of where people are actually working and there have a need for good broadband. I wanted to make a general comment that the sums actually are relatively small when you think about what we spend on highways infrastructure, and yet this is just as important, really. And you think of kind of the cost of engineering, you know, and civil engineers and so on. This seems very modest, actually, and I think we need more capacity in this. I think there's also a strong link to the cost of living in terms of making digital as accessible to everyone as we possibly can. We're going to see more and more people digitally excluded who can't afford those broadband subscriptions, and it's important that we have community hubs and libraries and other places where they can get that broadband. You think of just the kind of humiliation for people, really, kind of the exhaustion of having to find other ways of doing things that have now become digital. I would like to endorse the 3 recommendations, Chair, because I think that particularly the system of vouchers has worked very well in the rural fringe, and I'd like to see that extended, particularly when you have small work units, you know, farm buildings, conversions, things like that. Actually, the vouchers have been extremely helpful to businesses there. And as I said, in terms of people, more people now working from home and needing that, or having set up their own businesses. So definitely that. And I think that the new officer, I think we should have 3, but okay, let's endorse one for now, please, Chair.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I endorse it. I think it's a great way forward. I think my only observations and points would be the voucher scheme is likely to get taken up and be very contested, highly kind of desirable. And I'll go back to the earlier point about focusing on schools, GP surgery, hospices, those digital hubs that are not going to get the connectivity for, well, in some cases believe up to 2030, 2033. So we're almost talking a decade, for some, which I think we shouldn't find acceptable. I think we need to look at the map the needs of those priority areas and perhaps use this as a way to deploy to those first. I think in terms of the other observation is just be aware copper switch off within that as well. So PSTN, the old network, there's a drive because that is pushing always forever the wind in the sails for Project Gigabit. We want to get that network turned off. So that is always a factor lurking in the shadows. I think the other part, just in terms of the role, and it's great, I think that we get a policy, a person in place for the policy, and it's got to be angled around barrier busting. You know, I think the one thing about commercial investment is, you know, the easier it is to invest, the quicker it is to invest, the more we can sort of move aside and let the private sector get on and do it, I think is key. And the relationship between this and the priorities of what will come out under Lot 8 in terms of build areas and build sequence is something that needs to marry together. And it will be those things like, you know, exchange centre, exchange sites, you know, where are we going to be building those rural exchanges that are going to service all of these residents, and businesses, because without that infrastructure, you can't connect anybody anyway. So I think in terms of, I'm not sure exactly what the sort of JD for this post would be, but just linking into Helen's earlier point in relation to 5G and other some contentious issues, having that early engagement in terms of those exchange sites, in terms of the cabinets, in terms of that infrastructure, I think is a smart move. So yeah, I think it's a good step forward.
Just a comment.
Yeah, just to come back on those comments, thank you, Chair. So in terms of Councillor Scullion's comments around digital exclusion, yes, kind of echo those concerns really. It was something we looked at as a third proposal here for broadband gain share use, but we didn't, as a partnership, we weren't able to find a project that we could actually kind of pin our hopes on at the moment. So we thought initially it needs more engagement with the private sector, to see if we can kind of encourage them and engage with them to do more. Because I think we acknowledge that there is a basic broadband package that is available, but then obviously it's still got a cost. And then I think if it comes down to a case of spending £10 or £15 on broadband coverage versus some of the other utilities or food that are required, broadband sometimes often will lose out in that scenario. So it's not free broadband essentially. So we're doing a round robin of engagement with the private sector to see how far we can go with that. But ultimately, might need something from the public sector to bridge that gap. But it's something we're actively looking at. But it just wasn't at a time where we could bring it to the committee at this stage. So thank you for those comments. In relation to Steve Moore's comments, yes, I think the vouchers will be highly contested. I think Councillor Scullion, again, she mentioned the take-up in Calderdale. We need to work through that when we do as we do the project development work, whether it's kind of a spatialised pilot or whether it's kind of done on a thematic basis, as you say, maybe focusing on schools or maybe deprived areas or something. So it's something we can look at. But also acknowledging what I said earlier in the report about the broadband gain share being quite flexible. The idea here would be we could start off a programme using broadband gain share, and if it has legs, if it works and it does deliver good value for money for the public purse, we could look at extending that through other sources as take-up kind of drives up. So yeah, it's a bit of I wouldn't say a pilot because I think it's a bit beyond that really, but I think it's something that we can ramp up in terms of scale as take-up comes through. And then I think, yeah, in terms of the barrier busting, some of the wider pieces you mentioned, bit of a plug really. So we have actually got a range of jobs out to advert at the moment. One of those is a digital officer, which will be working under me, and they will be doing some of those tasks. So the proposal in the report for policy and development lead will be purely looking at Project Gigabit, whereas we'd have a separate officer looking at some of the wider engagement that we do. So the barrier busting, absolutely, as you mentioned, and also the comments I mentioned earlier about some of the mapping work in terms of getting our evidence base right. Again, they'll be able to support that. So hopefully, with subject to recruitment, we'll be able to kind of ramp up delivery in those areas and kind of enhance our impact. Okay.
Thanks for that, Justin. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, can we agree the recommendation set off at 10.1 to 10.4? Okay. Yes. The item 10 then, the Brownfield programme.
Patricia.
Patricia.
Hello. The Brownfield Housing Fund report is basically an update to committee on the current position of the Brownfield programme and also changes that have happened to the project pipeline in there. In July 2021, the Combined Authority approved the sequencing of projects into waves, and for the past year we've been working with applicants to develop and refine their projects to come forward through the assurance process. In addition, the Combined Authority also approved delegation to the Director of Delivery in consultation with the Chair to review projects and move them between waves to ensure that the programme could move at pace. So this will be outlined at point 2.6 in the report of those summarised changes to the pipeline. In addition, with regards to an update with the programme, following the Levelling Up White Paper announcement in February 22 this year, the Combined Authority has been notified of an additional 22.28 million that it will receive on top of the existing funding for the programme, but with the same end spend date of March 2025. A change request will be progressed through the assurance framework once the details of the increase outputs have been received. We haven't had formal notification of those yet, but that will come through. So therefore, following review of the existing pipeline and the strategic housing pipeline, and knowing that there would be additional outputs, a second call for projects was undertaken this year to see if there was any stall sites across the region that could meet the timeframes and challenges of the additional outputs. Following a review of the expression of interest, the Director of Delivery, along with the Chair of the panel, has approved the transfer of some projects from the original call through the waves, and some of those have actually also been withdrawn by applicants from the programme. The details of those are in exempt Appendix 1. But in summary, the changes to the existing pipeline are: for Bradford, 2 projects have not been able to achieve the BCR1, which is a DLUC requirement for the funding. These have been moved into Wave 4, but we continue to work with the applicants to see how we can review and bring those projects forward. In Calderdale, one applicant has slipped in time frame for it by a year, therefore they've moved to Wave 4. We believe that in summer they should be able to have identified a procurement developer, so therefore they should be able to hopefully come forward, but at the moment we're not sure on the number of outputs. One project has been withdrawn by the applicant in the Calderdale area. Other projects have just moved from Wave 1 to Wave 2, which is just to do with the issues of timing of delivery, either delays in planning or procurements. The Wave 3 projects that were originally in the programme were the large transformational projects that we always knew were going to be high risk. Those now have been placed back on the strategic housing pipeline for a collective partnership approach to see if a solution could be identified for the delivery, and that is also working with Homes England and the councils to try and see if we can deliver those. And in Kirklees, 2 projects have moved into Wave 4, again due to slippage to delivery in 2024, which places a high risk to the programme. As described before, the programme's in waves, and so therefore the new projects that have come forward have been placed into those waves, either Wave 1 or Wave 2, depending on their early deliverability to the programme to de-risk it. The remainder of any other projects have been placed into Wave 4, and we keep in contact with the applicant to see if anything there has moved forward or if they've received planning to show that the project could then potentially move forward. So the new Wave 1 and Wave 2's collective in exempt Appendix 1 show that the current forecasted spend is just under 76 million, with approximately 6,884 homes, of which 2,315 are to be affordable. This, of course, is subject to approval through the assurance process and delivery on site, and also taking currently into the impacts of inflation and rising build costs that we're currently starting to see coming through. So therefore, the recommendation is that the Place Regeneration Housing Committee endorse the work undertaken so far by the Brownfield Housing Fund and note the update on the pipeline of projects. Sorry, my voice is going, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments, any questions? Are we all happy to... Oh, sorry, Sam.
These might be really naive questions, and I hope it's okay to ask them. But just bearing in mind the couple of things. One, bearing in mind the conversation we had about policy earlier on and priorities. What's the implication of that conversation on the development of these developments? And my other one, and I think this is Amir's point that he could make much better than me, and you might be able to help me, Alex, is if there are some projects that don't meet the benefit cost ratio, isn't that because there's market failure in those areas? And what we need is some extra resource to be able to keep those in line with every other housing standards in other areas. And can we link that to the Shared Prosperity Fund stuff? Are we doing that strategically? Otherwise, again, my worry is that and Alex, you've heard me talk about this for decades, we're in danger of, widening the inequality gap, that we can only afford this kind of housing in areas where there's market failure, but we can afford this level of housing in other areas. And, I think as a combined authority, we should be recognising that, and we should be, we need to be, I think we should be finding a way to step in and resolve that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, Melanie will come back. I don't think it's a naive question at all, but Melanie, you want to?
Yeah, just to come back on that. I mean, very good points. As a combined authority, we are delivering this programme to the criteria that's been set by government, and there's a lot of conditions attached to the grant. Now we recognise that we've got a need for the grant, and any award is welcome, but we have been lobbying for additional flexibility. It is a concern to us that in some of our areas we cannot meet a floor of a BCR of 1, and by including further public funding, it makes the BCR even lower. So it doesn't help. It doesn't help to add in other funding sources because it just compounds the problem. So we'd like to see more flexibility across the programme, but at the moment there isn't any movement on that. We will continue to keep pressing for that, and we're working with other MCAs to look at that as well. Thank you.
Does that help?
Well, it helps me understand the issue then.
Okay. Can we agree with the recommendation? Public meeting now, and we need to discuss an additional item. Thanks very much.
Jeanette, do you want to come first?